In this edition of Corridors of Life, we'll travel to the Northwest Florida Water Management District's Central Land Management Region, located just north of Panama City. Here, we'll explore the St. Andrew Bay watershed. We'll look at the hydrological, geological, and ecological features so important to this area. Along the way, we'll meet some of the people who have a stake in the protection, conservation, and restoration of water resources within these crucial catchment basins. In Northwest Florida, especially if you live in Bay and Washington counties, we're fortunate to have some of the best water resources in the state. It's clean, tastes great, and requires very little treatment. But we can't take it for granted. We get most of our drinking water from groundwater, so whatever we put into the ground eventually makes it into our water. If we're not careful, future residential, agricultural, and industrial land use decisions could spoil our marvelous water. To better understand the risks, it's worth taking a few minutes to learn a bit about where our water comes from, and especially how it is collected and replenished. Although there are 4 major sources of surface and groundwater in our region, we'll concentrate on the 2 groundwater sources, the Floridan and the sand and gravel aquifers. The Floridan aquifer consists of an ancient series of thick limestone deposits. From east to west, it ranges from approximately 100 feet above sea level in Jackson County to 1,600 feet below sea level in southeastern Escambia County. Water well yields from the Floridan average between 500 and 1,000 gallons per minute. The sand and gravel aquifer is commonly known as a surficial aquifer. That's because it lies close to the surface of the ground, resting upon an impermeable layer, usually of clay or rock. Surficial aquifers are particularly vulnerable to pollutants from various land uses and land practices that occur on the surface. But what about surface water in lakes and streams? Believe it or not, we get less than 20% of our drinking water from lakes and streams. In fact, Deerpoint Lake Reservoir, located just north of Panama City, is the only surface supply of drinkable water in our district. Although it is a surface water supplier, the lake gets much of its water from the Floridan aquifer. One other term worth defining is watershed. It refers to an area of land that collects rainfall and drains water into streams, rivers, and eventually into a lake, reservoir, or bay. The terms catchment and drainage basin are also used interchangeably with watershed. The supply of groundwater is finite and it must be replenished or recharged. Rainfall is the major source of recharge. It can seep very slowly into the Floridan aquifer or more quickly into surficial aquifers that lie at or near the land's surface. As our area grows and develops, so does the threat or risk of contamination to our water supply. Protection of this precious resource in our area is the responsibility of the Northwest Florida Water Management District, one of 5 such districts in the state.
In Florida, managing water, I think, is particularly important. First of all, for water supply purposes, we are a very, very large state that continues to expand. Water supply is what drives that development. And so protecting our water supply sources, developing new sources of water is especially important.
Essential to that protection is land acquisition.
Many of the lands that we have acquired since 1984 primarily are composed of the major floodplains of the major river systems in Northwest Florida. And we do this to protect the downstream estuarine systems and the bay systems because those floodplains play an important role in providing nutrients to those systems, which will maintain the productivity of those bay systems for the public, for economic well-being, for the seafood industry, and other industries related to healthy, productive waters.
However, protection does not exclude the public from enjoying these natural places.
This particular district has always made public access to district properties a very, very high priority. Ever since we first started purchasing properties back in the early 80s, we elected to make those open to the public for recreational activities, whether those be hiking, horseback riding, hunting. And I'm very, very pleased to be able to say about 100%, almost 100% of our properties are open to the public, and it's just a high priority for us.
To date, the district has spent almost $140 million in public funds to acquire and protect water resource protection lands in Northwest Florida.
And then water supply, that's going to be a continuing focus of the district. The population of Florida is going to continue to expand, especially with the baby boom generation reaching retirement and a proportion of those coming to Florida and more discovering Northwest Florida. So I expect that water supply is going to continue to be a big focus of the district.
We begin our journey at the district's sole source of potable or drinkable surface water. This is Panama City and nearby Panama City Beach, the population center of Bay County, located at the southern end of the St. Andrews Bay watershed. An estimated 72,000, or 44% of the county's 163,000 people, live and work here. The area is a popular vacation destination as well. As far as Florida cities go, Panama City and Panama City Beach are modest municipalities.
However, considering its proximity to the Gulf Coast and plans for a regional airport nearby, the area is expected to grow. And of course, with growth comes an increase in demand for potable, clean water.
Bay County gets all of its public water from Deerpoint Lake Reservoir, located just 7 miles north of Panama City. The local water utility is permitted to take up to 69.5 million gallons of water per day, but 40 to 45 million gallons are typical. Under normal conditions, the lake gets about 40% of its water from rainfall and surface runoff, but during dry times, 80% of the water flowing into the lake comes exclusively from Econfina Creek. On average, about 300 million gallons of water or more per day comes courtesy of the creek. The Northwest Florida Water Management District owns most of the creek corridor that has its origins in southwestern Jackson County.
All this water in Deerpoint Lake has a humble origin. Let's go upstream and take a look.
From Deerpoint Lake Dam just above St. Andrew Bay, we travel north and then east for some tea-stained water.
North Florida's rivers are so beautiful and fantastic. I'm in Econfina Creek drainage here. This is up near the headwaters of the stream, near a place called Fountain. What's so exquisite about Econfina Creek is that it is composed of 3 major kinds of stream. This is the blackwater portion, which receives its discoloration from the organic material that's decomposing in the adjacent floodplain. During rains and when the creek is high, the water works back into the creek, bringing with it organic acids that stain it like this. Like tea, as a matter of fact. That's one of the tannins in tea, is the same kind of material that's in this water. Oh, it's unsweetened. This is a great place to talk about floodplain environments. Every stream has a low water channel and a broader floodplain. It's all part of the bed of the river. In this particular case, the floodplain is quite broad and only has water flowing in it during high water events during heavy rains. This particular swampy floodplain is dominated by things like black tie-tie, which you see here, And all behind me, all these little twisted black stems. This is swamp tupelo. And right here is an interesting story. This is the top of an old slash pine that used to be in here. It was logged out. I see stumps all over the place where man, maybe 50 to 67 years ago, cut out some very valuable lumber, which hasn't replaced itself in here. And it might take decades or probably centuries to get back to its pristine condition. Anyway, it's a floodplain habitat. You always have to look for the hand of man on these sorts of situations, but it's still very interesting, and it's all valuable to the quality of water in that creek over there because it filters things that come into it through this beautiful swampy environment and helps clean the water going into the stream.
From the headwaters, it's a short canoe ride to the creek's dramatic canyons of clay. When the water is low, you can paddle through this section of the creek called the chutes. Here we can view ancient clay revealing the foundation of a surficial aquifer.
This is what it's all about, Econfina Creek. You're looking at a fantastic valley cut into very, very hard clay. This clay is really important because it's relatively impermeable to water leaking down through it. So what happens? Sand on top of this clay captures rainwater, which leaks down and hits that clay and perches there. That's called a surficial aquifer. A little bit of the water in that surficial aquifer is draining right there. And just downstream, I'm going to show you some fantastic large streams that come out of that same sand body perched on this very clay called Steepheads. I have one of the animals I dearly love. This is a salamander, a fairly good size, but actually it'll get about 3 feet long. These are called Sirens, and they're in a family that only has 2 legs just behind the head, no hind legs at all. But it lives forever in water, common in the Econfina Creek Basin, swamps like you see behind me. Fascinating animals. We don't know a lot about their biology, to tell you the truth. And I've always wanted a good picture of this, so I have an aquarium just over there. I'm going to take this little baby up here and get myself a photograph.
From the chutes, it's back on land as we hike along the creek on Florida's scenic footpath.
We have people enjoying the Florida Trail from all over the country, through hikers from South Florida and from other parts of the country. Probably most of the use of the trail is by locals in the Bay County area and Panama City. And of course our own Florida Trail members enjoy the trail.
The Florida Trail Association is the volunteer association that builds, protects, and manages the entire Florida National Scenic Trail, as well as the Florida Trail System, which are small side loop trails off of the National Scenic Trail, which is a through hike all the way down in Big Cypress National Park in the Everglades until Gulf Islands National Seashore in the Panhandle here. So that's 1,400 miles of trail, but not quite connected yet, but we're working on it with all of our partners to fill in those gaps. Well, the Water Management District is one of 35 partners that we work with, one of many land managers, and probably one of our better partners in terms of getting things done out on the field and in a timely and efficient manner above all. But they provide great on-the-ground support for us during all of our construction projects, and all of that local knowledge that coming from another office elsewhere wouldn't know about the area. So they definitely help us practice with our best management practices on the ground in construction and trail planning and all of those things you need to maintain a hiking trail.
We are all volunteers here on the Florida Trail. There is a staff in Tallahassee, a paid staff, but in terms of these chapters, like our chapter, the Panhandle chapter, we're all volunteers. And we're out here because we enjoy it and because we want to give something back. And we love being in the outdoors. And also, we really want to preserve some little piece of the wilderness for future generations.
Well, this bridge was quite an achievement for a volunteer organization. It was a fully engineered design provided by the Forest Service, and they would normally send it out to a contractor, which might charge up to $500,000 to build it. And we, with volunteer labor, built it for only $40,000, and in 2 months, where it might have taken 6. And it was significantly less equipment. So the Water Management District was a great help in giving us access routes that were most convenient for our equipment and our volunteers, and really keeping a great base camp and keeping folks happy while they're working to make up that huge difference in funding. That sweat equity is what's making up the difference on that one. You know, building a through trail is a tricky thing, especially as development is happening around you. Those conservation easements are harder to get a hold of, so in our efforts to connect all the state parks and natural areas, we have to often cross private lands, and landowners will occasionally allow us hiking access through their property, and it makes all the difference in the world.
Continuing south, we come upon our first evidence of direct discharge from the Floridan aquifer into Econfina Creek. We also uncover evidence of an ancient estuary.
I just love this. This is a really exciting place. This is where the water in the Great Floridan Aquifer first bubbles up in Econfina Creek out of the limestone. There's one of the first springs in this beautiful creek, and it's joining right here the tea-stained waters coming downstream from many miles upstream, where it leaks out of the sand aquifer and runs off from stormwater activity. The two meet here and combine, and there's a really wonderful water temperature change. Over here where the spring is boiling out, it's about 69 degrees Fahrenheit, and over here in the tea-stained water, it's about 76. There's almost a 10-degree temperature difference. It's delicious. Unfortunately, you can love a beautiful place like this to death, and that's what happened to this bank. People have come in here to swim and enjoy the water in this little spring, but too many folks have climbed the bank and abused it, destroyed the vegetation, and you know, that's really a no-no. We need to learn to use our resources better than that. Look what we have here, the lion's paw scallop. I don't think it exists today. In fact, we have a whole bunch of mollusks, including an oyster species that is not found today. And the reason they're not found today is because these were part of an ancient bay 2 to 3 million years ago. These clams and other shells are in that clay layer that confines the superficial aquifer on top of the limestone that has the Floridan aquifer. Just upstream a little bit where we first saw that spring. And we're about to run out of this now and just have nothing but limestone and springs. We are so lucky in Florida to have such great aquatic treasures like this. This is Devil's Hole in southern Washington County. It's about 40 feet deep, according to some who have dove it. And you know what? This belongs to all the people of Florida. It's owned by and managed by the Northwest Florida Water Management District. Before it was publicly owned land, places like this get full of old cars, washing machines, all kinds of junk, trash, beer cans, and all sorts of things that pollute it. Now it has been cleaned up, and it is an absolutely exquisite gem of natural history. And you know what? A place like this is such a treasure. Now that it's managed for publicly owned land, they allow you to appreciate it and enjoy it. You can camp here. You can examine the beautiful wildlife in the surrounding area. And guess what else you can do? You can enjoy a lovely swim in one of Florida's fantastic sinkholes.
Detouring away from Econfina Creek, we travel 5 miles west for a glimpse directly into the Floridan aquifer.
I'm standing in the Deadening. This is a place where water collects and forms a shallow lake basin. But during dry times like now, most of that water percolates down through the sand and reaches the Floridan aquifer in the limestone underneath this. And guess where that water finally comes out? Econfina Creek. That water flows 4 to 5 miles, taking 6 to 8 weeks. In 2004, this big lake basin was way over my head. In this part of the Deadening, when water stands here, it averages up to 10 to 12 feet deep. You can see that abundantly on all the cypress trees here. I'm in another part of the Deadening. I came here specially to demonstrate something. The water in the Deadening does in fact go underground, and right here's the proof of it. This is a sinkhole that formed in the bottom of the Deadening because there was a cavity underneath that collapsed, exposing the Floridan aquifer right there. And that water, if you put a dye in it, will go all the way to Econfina Creek. And when the water comes back in this lake, guess where the bass and the brim and the catfish and the turtles will all come from? I see them right there, hanging on in that aquifer water. They'll recolonize this whole lake from places just like that.
Just on the Deadening's southern boundary, you'll see the successful collaboration between water management and equestrian enthusiasts. This property has long been popular with local horseback riders. However, starting in 2000, an influx of new residents was threatening to undo some of the district's erosion control and habitat restoration sites.
We had a lot of people moving from the cities to the rural areas. They were moving adjacent to our public lands, and nearly everyone was bringing a horse with them, or horses. We started having more and more adverse impacts, and we knew we had to get it under some sort of regulation. Your overall mission was to protect water resources naturally, but at the same time allow for recreational use, primarily horseback riding, and to develop single-use trails for the equestrian users.
The district met with local users to encourage the development of a designated, environmentally friendly trail system. Adoption of rules and regulations would ensure that users ride on designated trails and limit impact to water resources. The key to success would be a stakeholder involvement and a working model.
And so what we tried to do was pattern our equestrian group after the Florida Trail Association, a bunch of volunteers that would go out and develop these trails.
One of the most enthusiastic volunteers is longtime resident Sylvia Gates.
Right now on the water management property, there's 5 trails, and they might go 85 miles or better.
Sylvia and a group of roughly 20 to 25 volunteers have worked over the past 4 years to create and maintain a system of trails that is compatible with the district's water resource mission.
This is a volunteer organization. They do all the work, provide them with minimal signs and paint. They do all the work, and we meet with them to approve the trails. So there's very few public dollars expended for developing of these recreational trails.
If it wasn't for these lands that water management, you know, is letting us ride on, we wouldn't have no place to ride. We'd be running on the side of the road, and that's against the law.
In the 4 years since the volunteer work began, the Pine Ridge Equestrian Camp and Trail has become a favorite destination.
A nice variety of people love to ride these trails. These trails can cater to everybody. I actually even ride with a couple of ladies that are in their 70s. I get phone calls from people from out of town, out Alabama and other places, wanting maps and to come ride our trails because they've heard they're really, really nice.
Moving back east towards the creek, we come across a hydrologic feature that's not only impressive for its size, but also as a source of clean water recharge for Econfina Creek.
Yes, one of my favorite places, not only in Florida, but on the entire planet. This is a steephead. Steep, indeed, by that 45-degree angle slope. That's partly what defines it. And in steepheads, you have some tremendously unique vegetation beginning from the very top of the steephead where the driest soils are. You'll get laurel oak, tree sparkleberry, wild olive, all kinds of plants that really can survive in exceedingly dry soil. And then as you come down in the middle of the slope where the soil is slightly moister, you get a moisture-loving group of plants, including things like southern magnolia, American beech, and a wealth of other species right along this mid-zone. But as you go to the bottom of the slope, where the soils are very moist, we have wetland plants, star anise, sweet bay magnolia, and tall gallberry. And now, let's go see what's at the bottom. And this is what it's all about. Clean, potable water coming right out of a very steep valley sidewall. That valley sidewall, which forms the head of this valley, a steep head, is what a steep head is all about. And this water, which is leaking from the porous sands here, is carrying, sand grain at a time, the sediment that forms that wall with it downstream. As it does, it causes the bank or the valley sidewall to slump in. And you can see in this particular case, there was a big tree rooted here. Well, the tree and its roots have all fallen down as it was undercut by the stream. And now, because there's still sandy soil there, the stream continues to pull that sand away, the tree will die and rot, and the head of this little valley will continue to march headward.
Just a mile east of that magnificent steephead, we come to Quail Run Plantation. Previous owners, Whitey Urquhart and Bill Perry, sold a conservation easement, or special protection agreement, on their 1,600-acre tract to the Northwest Florida Water Management District in 2003.
Conservation easements are just another tool in the toolbox for water resource protection purposes. In addition to acquiring land in fee simple and outright ownership and management, we can also go in and especially properties that may have a high per acre land value, especially properties next to springs or some really developable river systems, and we can buy that owner's development or land use conversion rights at about half the cost of a fee simple transactions. Their property stays on the tax rolls, the district doesn't have to manage it, and we still protect water resources at half the cost.
We started off with about 1,600, 1,700 acres, and now we've wound up with about 1,200 acres.
We wanted this property preserved, if possible, forever. And through that conservation easement, we achieved that goal. And it given us a lot of insight into things that we could do to improve what we already had. Well, the easement requires that we allow no toxic substances here. We don't pave any roads within this place. It's restricted as far as development is concerned. There can be no development, no subdivisions or anything like that. It's to be maintained in its natural state.
The easement is just like the land lines. It's part of the property, so we feel good about that. We feel good about the fact that the easement that we sold to the state of Florida will always be a part of this piece of property.
Our hunting is quail hunting. Then we have a lot of deer, we have a lot of turkey, squirrels and stuff. We hunt nothing but quail. We've got to have good, pure, clean water as well as they can do it. And this Econfina Creek, which I understand we are a part of the recharge area, is the biggest provider of water to Deerpoint Lake, which provides the water for Tyndall, Panama City, other municipalities, and is quite a good supply of good water. I think it is a wonderful thing for me and Bill and for the future. You know, the way the country and the state of Florida and the Panhandle is on its way, growing with people. And I'd like to see some places later on that were as natural for our descendants and others as it has been for us.
Traveling back towards the southwest, we'll see how water control and soil erosion problems have been addressed through a successful partnership between water management and local government. Rattlesnake Lake is a public recreation site on district lands. Not long ago, vehicle access threatened the very existence of the lake. Don Walters is chairman of the Orange Hill Soil and Water Conservation District in nearby Chipley. Over the years, Orange Hill has successfully worked under contract with water management on a number of erosion control and mitigation projects.
What it was, there was a lot of dirt washing into the Rattlesnake Lake, coming down the hill from four-wheelers and four-wheel drive trucks and everything that was going up and down using it as a recreational area.
Local people went down there to fish, and this was the shortest route. They got to this point, there's the lake, they turned down there and went to it, but the soils are just not suitable for traffic, so it eroded and gullied, and all the sand that washed down, the county'd put more dirt in, it'd wash, and they'd bring more dirt in, it'd wash, it all ended up in the lake down there. What the water management did was cut this road off, and they changed its route down here like a more gradual slope down to the lake. And our job was to stop the erosion that was occurring right here in this going into this lake down here. So we planted longleaf pine, wiregrass, and switchgrass, which is a kind of a native grass. They didn't want anything that wasn't native here, no bahia grass, anything like that. They wanted it strictly to be native grasses, and so we planted those three species, and a lot of it has survived. Even though this is a hostile environment for anything to live, it's done fairly well. There's a fairly high survival rate on the longleaf pine and the wiregrass too, and it started to reseed a little bit, and it's going to take a long time to totally heal, but it's started the process.
It's amazing how much soil is not washed into the lake. If it had been going on much longer, the lake would have been filled up and no lake.
As I walk through this woods along this log, what should I behold but an eastern king snake? This animal is a native species of this habitat type. It's non-venomous, quite harmless. As you can see, it's not even attempting to bite me. It eats rodents and snakes, especially venomous ones. So he provides useful functions for the environment and is one of the components of biodiversity that the Northwest Florida Water Management District is trying to conserve by restoring and managing this very type of wonderful habitat. with a lot more species in it than just this guy. I'm gonna let him go.
Moving back to Econfina Creek, we'll meet the successful family owners of a business based on sustainable green ecotourism.
I'm April Gay with Econfina Creek Canoe Livery, home of Florida's most beautiful canoe trail. Our family's been in business here for about 22 years now. What you do is put in here at our place, and we've got canoes and kayaks available. Trip that people typically take is from here to Highway 388 Bridge. It's about a 3.5-hour trip, and along the way there's 6 different crystal clear sandy bottom springs that you can stop and swim, picnic, fish, whatever you like to do, and we pick you up and bring you back to your car. And we get a lot of the locals that come, as well as out-of-towners that come to enjoy the natural springs. My grandparents bought the property back in 1977 and actually moved up here the year I was born. And then my parents opened the business back in 1985, and I participated in the business since I was a child, and now my children participate in the business. The Econfina Creek is a unique creek in the fact that it has seven different springs. They're all crystal clear springs, and it's got the honeycomb lime rock banks on the way down, which is a really pretty sight. And you see a lot of different animals up here, from fish to birds and even some deer, squirrels, that kind of thing. And there are different kind of flowers blooming in the summertime. We've got the mountain laurel, we've got the wild azaleas, so it's a really pretty time during the summer as well. It's nice in the fact that we know we're helping the environment. We don't use any kind of motors on our boats, our canoes or kayaks. And so that helps, and that's very important with Econfina Creek. It does provide most of Bay County's drinking water. Water management's done a lovely job. Even though they're not in the recreation business, they're actually here for conservation. When we moved up here, and this was back since I was a child, there was a lot more litter. Some of the water was polluted, some of the bodies of water around here. And they took the time to clean up and really better the place. I think it helps out the local economy as well, brings people in, of course, to the restaurants and motels to stay. And it's a nice, clean business and a chance for people to really experience nature. I'll be here forever. As long as there's Econfina Creek, I'll be here.
We cross over to the east side of the creek, searching for a window into the past. In this historic cemetery lie the remains of the African-American Gaynor family, dating back over 100 years. The cemetery, which is on Water Management District property, is currently undergoing preservation. Not more than a couple hundred yards away, we've discovered an even older slice of history.
One of the many benefits the public derives from the Water Management District lands is they have inventoried and they protect archaeological treasures, just like this. This is an old gristmill. There's a dam on this beautiful little creek that used to spill water into a big wheel that was on an axle that turned a grindstone. And this is how the locals used to grind their corn, the major staple of the South. Well, guess what? In 1864, the Union Army came through here and burnt this gristmill and many others. So we have a wonderful history here. All of this goes to show that the Water Management District does a whole lot more than just conserve the water resource. In this case, it conserves archaeological treasures.
Leaving the historic mill and traveling west along Highway 20, we discover how native habitat restoration contributes to the health of the watershed.
I'm walking in a planted sandpine forest. This forest is very different from the original longleaf pine ecosystem that used to be here. The main difference is in the richness of plants and animals. Here you see a virtual desert of nothing but pine needles and very few plants. But in the natural native forest here, whew, the biodiversity was fantastic. This was once one of those sandpine forests. This is about 8 or 10 years of attempt to restore the native longleaf pine wiregrass forest with all of its fantastic biodiversity.
Water Management purchased this land to restore it to its natural shape, natural form. It was out of kilter due to forest management practices in the past, the wrong species, predominantly sand pine planted by timber companies for pulp production. That's the major off-site species that we encounter. And what we're trying to do here is restore it back by removing off-site species and put it back to its natural state. Putting longleaf back and adding some supplemental wiregrass just to enhance that process and speed it up. This is a fire-driven ecosystem, and the ground cover prevents soil movement and carries fire to keep the system in its natural state. Without the ground cover, the fire won't carry, and without the ground cover, the soil erodes.
Well, what we have here is a longleaf restoration site. And in 2005, this was a sand pine plantation that we harvested, and then we replanted it in longleaf. But the harvesting left a big seed bank of sand pine that has sprouted up, and we have a crew here going through there with chainsaws cutting the sand pine out of the longleaf. Well, this is a sand pine right here that they have already cut down. And this is a longleaf.
Over the years, while conducting our habitat restoration activities, we've pretty much figured out how to restore the longleaf pine overstory. But we're really having problems trying to restore the ground cover. And one of the keystone species we want to try to restore is the wiregrass. And the way you have to restore that is you've got to have large quantities of seed. This site is a wiregrass donor site. What we typically do in wiregrass donor sites is we'll come in mid-May to mid-June. We'll run a growing season burn through here. This will make the wiregrass and some of the other ground cover plants go to flower, and then they'll ripen seeds all during the summer, and then mid-November to mid-December we'll come in here with a hand collector or mechanical collecting devices, and we'll collect the seed for use in growing more wiregrass plants or for direct seeding activities on other district lands that we're trying to restore.
What we're doing is restoring these areas from pasture to the original longleaf pine wiregrass. And one of the steps in establishing the longleaf pine wiregrass is to get the ground cover established, and that's why we're planting the wiregrass. This could be actually used as a donor site. In other words, once this wiregrass gets established, we'll come back and we'll collect the seed from it. And we'll actually use the seed for other areas that need to be restored. In the future, I have a feeling that we probably will plant some longleaf pine to make the complete system of longleaf pine wiregrass.
This is the longleaf pine wiregrass ecosystem, a vista of open canopied pines, the longleaf pine, with a very diverse ground cover of herbaceous vegetation. Now this may not look very biodiversity rich right now because it's been burned recently and all this is new growth. But there are upwards of 150 species of plants per 2.5 acre plot here. That's how rich it is. And of course, wherever you have plant species richness, guess what follows that? Animal species richness. So why is it more important to have a wonderful biodiverse longleaf native ecosystem on a site like this than that densely planted sandpine forest? Well, biodiversity is intrinsically very valuable, and we all want that. But the Water Management District wants also to protect the water resource, and in sandpine forest, they intercept more rainwater than longleaf pine forest. So the longleaf pine forest is a better source of recharging our groundwater than is that nasty sandpine forest.
Red wolf and Florida panther are just two of the mammals that have gone extinct in the Florida Panhandle. Black bear and bobcat have been on the decline for years, but restoration and maintenance of native habitat is crucial to their survival. Both these species utilize the wetlands as well as the uplands of Water Management District lands. Although saving these iconic American mammals is not the district's main objective, their survival is greatly enhanced by the district's main mandate for water protection. Heading back east, we'll find the area's only first magnitude spring with a history of human settlement that predates the Civil War.
Yeah, Mr. Gaynor, from what I understand, he was a surveyor with General Jackson. And they came through here, and he returned afterwards from the Carolinas, I believe, brought his slaves in, cleared some land, and settled this part of the country in the early 1800s. And it was in the family up until the time H. Holton Harders bought the property, and then he sold us interest in it. This was in the 50s. What attracted us to the property, of course, is the same thing that attracted the Gaynors to the property, is water. And we have a wonderful source of spring water here. In fact, it's a first magnitude spring, the only one in Bay County. Well, through the years, Mr. Harders named it Emerald Springs, and then it's been called Econfina Springs, but the real name of the spring is Gaynor Springs. We had 149 acres on the east side of the creek. We had probably a quarter of a mile of waterfront, which we very seldom used. So we talked to the water management about exchanging the waterfront property on the east side of the creek for about 800 acres, joining us non-waterfront on the west end of our property along Highway 20. But anyway, it enhanced what we're doing here. We're trying to make this more or less a bird game refuge, very light hunting, but pretty much managed hunting. The reason we need to protect these headwaters, it's a vital supply of fresh water for Bay County, Panama City, and etc. We've been in business for over 50 years in Bay County. A lot of the water that we use in Captain Anderson's restaurant on the beach comes from right up here. Off this area right here, there's probably 190 million gallons a day coming out of this area. Just to give you an example, Bay County, Panama City Beach, Mexico Beach, paper mill use approximately 60 million. These type of springs are very rare. They're like jewels in a crown, and they should be protected. But also, the public should be able to use them also. There should be a way of working around it to have public access, supervised access, let the public enjoy it, and it still at the same time protect our resources.
I'm wading in your drinking water on the way to view where the fabulous potable waters of the Floridan Aquifer empty into Econfina Creek. I happen to spot a place where the limestone has collapsed because this little creek has dissolved a tunnel, allowing the ceiling to collapse, showing us that creek itself. This is that clear, beautiful, potable water. Many streams like this exist in the limestone, and we'll go shortly and see a huge outflow in a big underground river. Working our way down Econfina Creek, we've seen the sand in which the surficial aquifer is perched that is drained by Steephead streams. And then we saw that shelly clay that holds that surficial aquifer up in that sand. Well, now, underlying both the sand and the clay, we see the most important of all the water supply in the drainage, and that is the Floridan aquifer, which is contained in all the conduits and tunnels found in this beautiful limestone you see outcropped all around me. We've come down gradient and down through the earth far enough now to see that limestone. And here we have a beautiful spring emerging. This is discharge that actually worked its way in here from way up gradient in some of those dry lake basins like the Deadening and others. That water worked down, got into the limestone, and is now coming out into Econfina Creek. And ultimately, this is the drinking water for this part of the Northwest Florida Water Management District's holdings. And it's spectacular. And I love it. High limestone hills adjacent to lower Econfina Creek support a magnificent southern temperate hardwood forest. Situated on these high bluffs, these great trees are naturally protected from fire. Otherwise, these sites would be in longleaf pine. By protecting the purity of the water supply, the Water Management District also protects this exquisite and tree-rich plant community of up to 35 species of trees. This forest type has more trees than any other forest type in North America north of Mexico. Florida has more first magnitude springs than anywhere else in the United States and Canada. A first magnitude spring is 100 cubic feet per second flow or more. And look at the volume of water coming out of this gorgeous thing. This is Gainer Springs on Econfina Creek. Another of the wonderful features here is where this aquifer water coming out of the deep limestone conduits confluence with the tea-stained waters of Econfina Creek. A problem for a beautiful spring like this is love, too much love. The land under the water out there is sovereign land. It belongs to all the people of the United States. So you can come in here in a canoe and love it all you like, but getting out of the canoe, bringing your boats in here, causes huge amount of erosion when there are, literally tens or hundreds of people over a period of many years. And it has caused this bank to erode so much that attempts here to stabilize it have been made with concrete bags and the like, but still it hasn't been very effective. The Northwest Florida Water Management District, in partnership with the Department of Environmental Protection, is working with local landowners to try to address these problems. It is pretty. Well, I've been walking around looking for rattlesnakes in this habitat. Rattlesnakes are also native creatures in longleaf pine forests, and normally you'll find them by a Gopher tortoise burrow, which I have right there, or by a stump hole. And let's see if we can get him to go back into his burrow. And it won't take much once he loses his attention on me. Let's see what I can get him to go back down his hole. There he goes. Look at that. Bye. The eastern diamondback is as much a native of this longleaf pine ecosystem as the red cockaded woodpecker, bobwhite quail, wild turkey, or the eastern kingsnake we saw. Here it is in a gopher tortoise burrow where in November, December, January, February, and sometimes a little bit of March, they spend the winter time because it's too cold for them on the surface of the ground. It's part of the biodiversity of Florida and the coastal plain where these beautiful longleaf forests occur. Unfortunately, they have been reduced to less than 2% of their original extent. So if we want to preserve and conserve the native environment and all those wonderful animals and plants that live in that habitat, we need to save some. Traveling just a few miles downstream, we discover some surprising topography. I'm sitting in a very special place. You don't expect in Florida to have high banks and steep slopes, but boy, there's one right here. I'm at least 20, 25 feet above Econfina Creek. And down below, the river is doing something against the limestone that I'm sitting on that I'd like to show you. I got something to hold on. This is what I want to show you. I'm nestled up under a ledge in a notch that runs along the creek here. This is a contact zone between two different types of limestone, and it's along the contact zone, which is called a bedding plane, that water most works its way. That is where, miles inland behind me, rainwater coming down and hitting that contact zone will dissolve the tunnels and conduits in which the Floridan aquifer resides. And that beautiful water that comes out of the limestone into this river, mixing with the tea-stained waters, is what we drink.
From here, it's not far to the end of Econfina Creek, where it enters the northern end of Deerpoint Lake. The importance of Deerpoint Lake cannot be underestimated. However, Bay County's growth has spurred the local water utility to explore additional groundwater sources.
The Bay County Utilities and Bay County Board of County Commissioners are working with the Northwest Florida Water Management District to develop an alternate redundant groundwater supply in the northwest section of the county. By having this alternate redundant supply, if something was to happen to the reservoir, either environmentally or from a hurricane or storm surge that would negatively impact the dam, we would have the ability to supply drinking water to the citizens of Bay County while we were restoring the reservoir or the dam.
And now we've come to the end of our journey. This is also the end of the journey of all that wonderful clean drinking water, which is backed up behind this dam made expressly for the purpose of impounding that water. I'm Bruce Means. Thank you so much for joining me. I look forward to seeing you on the next Corridors of Life.